Hey, this is Dr. Drew, and you were listening to This Life
with Bob Forrest
and Dr. Drew.
Here we are.
All right, welcome to another episode of This Life. You'll notice the intro is a little different than usual. Bob Forrest could not make it in today, but I'm very privileged and pleased to bring you all Mike Catherwood. Mike, welcome.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here.
And we pushed this along. Bob could not get in. He also said he didn't really want to talk about this because he was so depressed. But on the heels of Chris Cornell's suicide, we really felt it was important to do a podcast.
Yeah, and I think it wasn't that Bob doesn't want to talk about it. It was just not yet.
No. Listen, I'm not disparaging Bob. He was rocked by this. But it actually, the First Lady of Love, Susan, our producer, is one that really, really pushed this thing along because she was aware, and I think appropriately so, how much this not just rocked Bob, it rocked everybody.
Yeah.
This is different. This somehow feels different.
If you are part of the music community like Bob was, I think it's a shame that more people don't know how important Bob was to that generation of rock and roll and punk rock.
Chris or Bob?
Bob,
yeah.
But if you, along with Bob, if you were a member of the rock or the punk community, alternative music community in a couple of those decades there, or if you were just a super big fan, the death of Chris Cornell is just devastating. I mean, it's really devastating.
And you got to remember, he was Man of the Year for Music Cares. And then to hear now that his recovery got sabotaged by I don't want to listen. I'm not disparaging my peers. I don't know what decision making went into, deciding to put this young man, 52 years old, Chris Cornell, now gone, put him on lorazepam, Ativan. I would never do that. I would never allow that for any of my patients in recovery. It got out of hand. We don't know to what extent people were trying to get him off it, but there's no doubt that the relapse contributed to his demise.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I don't know how anyone could argue that.
Well, people are saying, well, he was anxious and depressed. Ativan might have helped. No.
Oh, well, there's a problem.
You don't
it probably did. It's a very effective drug. Just like all drugs are effective at doing what they're supposed to do. If you have anxiety, I'm sure lorazepam is quite effective at dealing with it. What people don't understand, what Dr. Drew's alluding to with his peers, what the general public doesn't get is that it doesn't matter when it comes to the brain of an addict.
Right.
It may work for its given job, but it's going to have a litany of devastating side effects to the drug addict,
Yeah. Now, Mike obviously did Love Line with me for several years. Those of you that know the show from Corolla, Mike took over after a while. And
comfortably, I can say I'm at least the fourth best co-host in Loveline.
And we've contemplated bringing back a Loveline podcast. I know there are a lot of people out there that have been asking that. We're thinking about it. We're trying to figure out how to do it. But we also have a KABC radio show, and you can get that podcast at doctor.com. And it's here in Los Angeles on 790 AM. And we talked about this on the AM show, and people came in the room and, oh, my God, that was a great discussion. I can't remember what we specifically said. I asked you something about, can you imagine what it would be like or what would happen to you if somebody exposed you to these medications?
Well, yeah, and I told you people have tried numerous times. And I feel like that when it comes to doctors, RNs, emergency room workers, EMTs, whoever it may be that is going to give a barbiturate or, a benzodiazepine or an SSRI that may be habit forming.
There's no SSRI. SSRIs are not habit forming.
Oh, something along those lines.
Opiate or benzo or PARB, yes. Okay. A pharmaceutical agent that has potential for addiction, that triggers the reward system.
Right.
A stimulant, Adderall. Ugh. I mean, Philip Seymour Hoffman. I was back then. I said there's an Adderall prescription at his bedside. Every one of these people either has everyone you can think of that has died of addiction or a complication of addiction. And by the way, I consider suicide and depression complications of addiction in many of these cases, as is the case here.
As is the case here, yeah.
Yeah. And you will find either some triggering agent like the Ativan or the Adderall in Philip Seymour Hoffman's case, or you'll find a bottle of benzodiazepine and opiate, which is a deadly combination for a drug addict.
Well, I got into the couple stories I have of, I've been in recovery just under 15 years. And every time I go to visit a doctor for some unfortunate accident, if I pass out
tell
from
the story,
my large poo.
Tell that story. Go ahead.
I went to Coachella last year, not this most recent one, and my wife and I was very excited about seeing the real Guns N' Roses, not like Axl's bastardized versions.
Yeah.
And I wake up in the morning, and again, let me point out, I'm very much drug and alcohol free. This is just a dude on a cup of coffee, and I tell my wife, I got to go to the bathroom. which is not surprising because I like to spend most of my time there.
Follow his Instagram. You can see all the
Yeah, I do.
all the glory that he documents.
I document it. And when I came out, I don't remember this, which is the most scary. But my wife says I was pale, naked, and I looked at her and I gave her this funny look and just fell backwards, smashed my head on the sink.
God.
Apparently, according to Dr. Drew and other medical professionals, I tripped my vasovagal nerve.
Yeah, it's a vasovagal reaction. Yeah.
And so I had to lay off the fiber because I guess I had too many monsters coming out.
You're too much of a pussy is what it boils down
How
to.
dared you?
I'm surprised you don't get that when you're lifting something. You're deadlifting those heavy weights because that's a great way to trigger a vasovagal reaction.
Well,
do you ever get lightheaded after that?
Oh yeah. Well,
so.
I mean, once you work up to a certain, like a respectable amount of weight, anybody who Olympic lifts or power lifts, like keep something upright handy because
or to go to your knees right after you finish the lift.
There's plenty of video on YouTube. Go just the deadlift alone of dudes like, all right, big lift, whoop, and smash their head on a dumbbell rack. So I got rushed to the emergency room. Paramedics obviously were called because my wife was freaking out, and after I came to and kind of got fluids in me, I was in the emergency room and a nurse came over and said, okay, to deal with the pain from smacking my head, I'm going to give you some morphine. And I was like, no, I'm a drug addict. I can't really have any morphine. And he said, oh no, I'll control the dosage and I won't give you any to leave with.
No.
And that right there,
it's a profound lack of understanding of how this thing works.
Right. And it's the idea that, oh, well, if I don't have access to some when I leave, I can't obviously go take more morphine. The truth is that you can't regulate the dosage of what goes on in my brain. That's the reaction in my mind.
So the reward system gets activated and the thing gets reawakened, right?
Yeah.
So obfuscating, lying, distorting, isolating, all that stuff is what's activated when people get exposed to these chemicals. Now, if you got a dose of morphine, I can't say for the next 2 weeks you'd be screwed up. But if you got a couple of days of morphine, I can guarantee you for a couple of weeks you'll be screwed up. Shelley tells a great story of waking up in her disease, knowing she was in her disease, obfuscating, bullshitting, lying, distorting, manipulating, isolating, and couldn't do anything about it.
I'd figure out a way to get more, even if I wouldn't like to. Like somehow, some way, I know.
You just know that would go.
Especially a drug that good.
Yeah.
I mean, if I like accidentally ate a pot brownie.
Let's say you couldn't. Let's say you lived in a world where you couldn't get it. What would that do to your moods and your anxieties and your sense of desperation?
Well, it would make me panicky, and it would make me really angry that I was kind of tickled. But it'd be like going.
What would you be like?
Let me tell you, it'd be like going to like a shady Asian massage parlor to get a happy ending, and then she just gives you a little massage. I'd be like, well, what are we doing here? Then I would inevitably have to walk the streets of Alhambra to find the next place to get me to finish it off.
Or would you start to isolate and become brooding and become? Would you think of hurting yourself? Well, is there a world where that happens?
Yes, because I know. Oh, I mean, I can assume I'm a 38-year-old man now. I was 22 years old last time I used drugs, but if I'm the type of guy that's not. I'm not an angry or violent person when I get high or when I get drunk. I isolate. Isolate even more.
That's the part. That's the part I think people.
I would just cut my wife and my daughter out of my life, which would be obviously.
You'd cut everything off, and you'd
be
in your disease by yourself in your disease, spinning.
The thing is, though, I feel like,
and then you'd feel shame and guilt and all that stuff, and then who knows where that would go.
When the shrink gives the drug addict Xanax, or when the guy at the hospital tried to give me morphine, I do feel like it's clearly a profound misunderstanding of the disease of addiction. But I do think the motives are all twisted. I don't think anybody's sitting back going, wait till
Mike, never in a million years would I suggest
but
what bothers me is...
I think the public is confused in that regard.
Oh, my gosh,
There's this assumption that you're like, it's a pejorative that you're saying this about the medical industry.
I'm frustrated that they don't get it. I'm just frustrated that I've been chanting about how this disease works for decade and a half, and yet this is still going on. At least we're getting somewhere with the opiate addiction. We're finally getting somewhere with that. I was reminded the other day when Heath Ledger died.
Mm-hmm.
didn't have addiction, I was like, no. That's a drug addict dead. That's how they all die.
Yeah.
And remember the dad was on a campaign to say he wasn't an addict and all this stuff. Remember that?
What's the point, though?
I don't know.
Is there still that shame?
Well, yeah, I guess. It's weird. But you and I don't understand that. But I guess some people feel that. But I was reminded that day I went on some sort of platform and said, this is the lip of the wave of the tsunami that's coming our way.
Right.
And it was. And here we are.
I don't necessarily understand it. And this is coming from the mouth of a guy. I absolutely love drugs. And I love them with a almost an incalculable passion.
Well, this is
and I still don't understand how people are so hung up. What I mean by that is...
But they don't understand what that means. People don't understand that. They don't get that because most people non-addicts don't have that relationship with chemicals.
Right.
And you do.
Right.
And so explain that to people.
I love it like you would love your dog. I love it like I'm unsure, and I hate saying this out loud because it makes me feel bad. I'm unsure I'll ever get to the level where I'll love people, any person, including my child and my wife, like I used to love cocaine and whiskey.
Can I tell you that that's progress?
Yeah,
because you used to say there's no way you'd ever find anything.
Of course.
I think your daughter changed that
without question. Yeah, no, it changed me dramatically in a lot of ways. I don't want to be so cliche. It's like, well, it changes the whole world for you. Of course, having a child changes everything, unless you're a sociopath. But it, I can't explain that. I have this general malaise now where I go, nothing kind of scratches that itch in the same way where. I didn't even have to have it yet. It was just knowing that I only had 30 more minutes of work left and I could be at my dealer's house. Oh, the joy of the sun setting and the rainbows that would form for me if I could get high and get drunk.
And again, to defend to help people understand what this is, the same part of the brain that's triggered by his love for his daughter is triggered by these chemicals. So that same thing that you can feel for your daughter is co-opted by this thing we call addiction.
Okay, people listening, people watching that have children, you know how your kids you may be a very reasonable, very level-headed person. Your children will force you to do really wacky, unreasonable stuff because you just want to make sure that they're okay and you love them so much. Very passive gentleman, if someone was texting and texting and almost hit their kid, a very passive guy might just jump right through that guy's windshield and beat the whatever. And the drugs were the same way. It's like I never was a angry, violent. I never wished anything. I certainly wasn't a dishonest guy, and I could become the biggest silver-tongued liar in the world just because for the sake of I needed to get high. I needed it, and
here's the thing that people don't. Here's another example of that same thing. I had a young man say to me once. He goes, he got very suicidal, and and people when they're suicidal with addiction, they often want to kill the addict, not themselves. They just want the disease to end. They get so frustrated with it. Again, another thing people don't understand. And he said to me, he goes, I don't know if you're going to understand this. He goes, but the second time he had been through a couple suicidal sort of things, and the second time he went, I had a gun in my mouth. I was ready to do it, but I couldn't. He goes, I don't know how to express this, and it may sound funny to you, but I couldn't do that to my drugs. In other words, I love them too much.
I'd be gone. I'd be gone from cocaine world or meth world.
That's
or whatever.
right.
Yeah.
I love them too much to leave them behind. I love them like my children.
I always felt like I was buried. Like I felt like there was this clearly you could touch and feel this meat wagon that was around drugs and passion for drugs, but inside there was this core always of needing to get inebriated that fueled me, and it really was all encompassing. It was like I used to say I felt like I was buried alive by myself.
Yeah, jeez, that's a great description.
When I was 21 years old, I remember living. I was I had like you couldn't create a better, more supportive upbringing for a person if they wanted to do whatever in life. And I was at the time living in flop houses and meeting new people just so that I could crash on their couch, so that I could keep using whatever money I had. I would give to my addiction. And I remember this guy Adam, who was the only source of drugs for me at the time. He was the gayest guy that's ever lived, but yet he never ever pushed on me in that way. But we used to hang out. He was an old guy. I was 21, 22. He and I would hang out all day, every day. and he had a ton of dough, and he and I just would sit there and smoke rock cocaine all the time. And I remember telling him that I feel like it's not like the world's coming down on me or I have the world's weight on my shoulders. I feel like I have the weight of myself on top of the real me, and I'll never be able to kind of get out of it.
Wow.
That was the only way I could describe it.
That is a very vivid, profound.
Yeah.
Anybody saying anything on Facebook there? Is it Mark? Oh, Susan's watching it. Because we're going to get into the Chris Cornell depression next. That's our next sort of version of this.
Well, one guy was asking, he's weaning off of clonazepam with Neurontin. He wants to know how long to keep doing that.
Well, the Neurontin. See, I'm a big believer in. I don't think tapering is a good idea. This tapering has become the thing now. Tapering is a terrible idea. Humbly, my opinion. I'm not saying you can't taper. I've never found it to be useful or good. I can get somebody off something. So they spend 5 to 7 days in the hospital or whatever, and then they have some post-acute withdrawal. We can treat that, and it's over. It's done. It's done. It's done. And with the Klonopin, a long-acting benzodiazepine, the withdrawal is about a year. So you need to take moderate to high-dose Neurontin for like a year and expect that, because you'll have sleep disturbances and irritability and more panic than usual, more anxiety than usual. And that's all what we call post-acute withdrawal from benzodiazepines. And Ativan is a very close relative of clonazepam or Klonopin. And Chris, I guess, was on it for 4 years, I'm hearing. And that's just, and it had been escalating doses, as it always is in addiction. With addicts, you can't maintain the same value, therapeutic value. They naturally escalate. They naturally use too much, even without them realizing it. And so if you have an addict who's very enthusiastic about being your patient, telling you're the greatest doctor ever, making appointments on time, paying their bills, you be careful with the medication you're giving them, because that may motivate them.
My shrink has a hard time dragging me into his office.
Yeah.
You know why?
Yeah.
Because he gives me Wellbutrin. It doesn't do any. I can't feel anything. Believe
it
you
makes
me.
You work hard.
If he was giving me Xanax bars, I'd be like waiting at his front door every day when he opened up the office.
You'd be singing his praises everywhere.
And another thing that you pointed out is that there's this notion from normies, meaning people who are not addicts, and I don't say this as if like, oh, because I've been through what I've been through, I know more. I mean, like, I'm so jealous and envious that you can have a drink like a gentleman and not end up with a dick pic on Instagram. That's another thing, is that people I cannot describe how. I remember the last time I relapsed, before I got clean for good, hopefully, knock on wood, is that there was this feeling of, sure, I only had one drink and my tolerance was always very high. But as soon as it hit my lips, I could feel it opening up in my body. It's like poison.
Yeah.
For whatever, that reward system, when it's triggered, it's as if, someone in a Shakespearean play drinking poison. It's only, you may be aware you're going to die. It doesn't happen immediately, but you're dead. You're dead. I just sit there and I go, uh-oh. Because I know. I know it.
Yeah. And there's another difference that people don't understand. There's a difference in the brain mechanisms between wanting and liking, right? When you're an addict, it's usually both. But even when you stop liking it anymore, you can't stop the wanting. And that's where the disease really takes over.
There was a good amount of time, well over a year, where I would be using every single time I was using, and I didn't like it.
Yeah.
I didn't even enjoy the high. I wanted to go to sleep. I wanted to look good. Next time I went home to visit my parents, I wanted to not look like a ghost. I wanted to, like I said, have a nice meal. But I
not feel like that.
But I couldn't stop.
Yeah,
I could not. Every single day. And smokers out there know the feeling. I guarantee you, the last
tobacco smokers.
Yeah, the last 1,000 cigarettes you have, you don't even like it. You just have to have it. You finish your meal. You're like, what am I doing? This sucks. It's 1,000,000 degrees outside. Why would I do this? But you can't stop. That's a very clear way of noticing.
Tobacco is a good wanting drug. Stimulants are wanting drugs more than you like them to some extent. That's why you start with them. But
you convince yourself you need it, though, and that's the biggest problem.
The disease makes you think all kinds of crazy stuff.
But it's times 1,000,000 with opiate-based painkillers, because you couple it with my brain is telling me I seriously have pain. I have pain and it hurts, and I need this to stop the pain.
Yeah.
And I'm sure somewhere along the line you had legitimate pain. You got you hurt yourself at work or whatever. But your brain convinces you, like, well, because of pain, I get this amazing feeling. Therefore, I have pain. Let
me bring up. As long as we're talking about this, I'll bring up a email I got. This guy is writing on behalf of his wife, who suddenly one day felt a sharp stabbing electric pain on the left side of her face. It dissipated about 20 minutes, but then it came back, and the rest of her life has been this pursuit of
Oh my
pain.
gosh.
Now, two things for him to know. One is there are very sophisticated neurosurgeons out there that know how to sort of image the trigeminal nerve, which is a nerve that gives pain perception to the face. And very occasionally, there can be nodes on that can be sort of scraped off. There are things that can be done. So make sure she sees sort of quaternary centers like university center neurosurgery departments that really know about that kind of pain. He goes on to talk about how he's seen doctors and he can't get anybody to do anything. They finally saw somebody at Pain Medicine, and his recommendation was to get off the Percocet and see a chiropractor and maybe do some water aerobics, and he was upset. But here's what that is. Opiates make chronic. First of all, I'm concerned that this persistent pain may be something called a reflex sympathetic dystrophy type syndrome, but in your face rather than the limb where it normally develops. And that, I'm telling you, is triggered by opiates. So the whole thing may be triggered by opiates. Opiates are not an effective treatment for chronic pain. It makes the pain worse over time and sort of indoctrinates it. It creates a part of your brain to misfire called the insular cortex that amplifies the misery of pain, so you're constantly in a panic over the pain, even though those somatic expression may not be that bad. So he's searching for, his question is addiction to pain medication really a concern for people in chronic pain? Absolutely. Severely. Even the pain management people realize that they say 35% of people that they treat have problems controlling it. Doesn't mean they're a drug addict. Yeah, they're addicts. And I will tell you it's more like 60 to 70% because I spent the latter part of my career just taking people like your wife off opiates and their pain goes away. Not away, but it gets dramatically better.
And if I could just add a little to because I'm sure your wife's seriously suffering.
Yeah. The suffering is that without question. It's horrible.
It gets worse before it gets better.
Well, no, see, that's why I cold turkey everybody, particularly in this kind of situation. Suboxone may have a role to play here. Dr. Bruce, if you watch Weekly Infusion, listen to Weekly Infusion, he's a big believer that can help somebody like this, and it might. But she's somebody with resources and a motivated spouse and, wants to go get it taken care of. You should want that. And, when in my world, when we treated this, you'd have 5 miserable days. You would. And guess what? You won't really even think about it or remember it after the fact. And we can do things to make it tolerable. At least I used to be able to do it. It seems like that's an art that's gone now.
Yeah.
It's fun. I'm like, the one thing I never, ever, ever thought to myself when I was taking people off opiates was, God, I sure wish I had some better tools to get them off the opiates. I had everything I needed. I never had a problem getting people off heroin or anything. It's so weird to me that we had to come up with a better way to do it. And the one symptom that was really...
So American.
Yeah, I know.
But they're like...
We got to tape. We got to make it comfortable.
Well, also that certain drugs aren't good enough. Yeah. Like only Americans would be like, well, this is pretty awesome, but I'm sure there's something else on the horizon.
I never thought to myself, I wish we had better ways to get people off opiates. Never. I never had a problem. It was never an issue. Yeah. The one symptom that was difficult to control, and people are missing now still to this day, they're not talking about it, is desperation. Sometimes in your withdrawal, you get that desperate feeling. And desperation is really just your disease going, go get drugs. That's all that is. And you can manage desperation with engagement, with even interpersonal engagement. I've seen it go from a 10 to a 0 just by putting somebody in a room with another person. And there are medications that can help it too. Alcoholics that get desperate, Camprol can be very useful. All right, we'll take a quick break and we'll come back and talk about Chris Cornell and Hydrolite. Of course, you've heard me rave about these guys. It's a product that I actually wanted to develop myself. I conceived of this. I knew it was needed. It was already in Australia, and now it is here. It works. The feedback is unanimous. Even though it's great to use, though, when you're sick or dehydrated, you can use it every day, especially now that the weather is changing. It's hot. So whether you're exercising or maybe you got seasonal allergies or you drank too much or you got vomiting or diarrhea, whatever it might be, you can reduce fatigue and keep feeling healthy as well. Once you've started feeling dehydrated, sometimes a little too late. So you want to stay hydrated. And rapid rehydration, if you do get dehydrated, requires a proper balance of sodium, glucose, and water. And nothing provides it like Hydrolite. I'm telling you, it's the same as an IV fluid via your mouth, via your enteral system. It's based on established, proven science, quite simply the best rehydration product out there. And it comes in great flavors. They have those fizzy tablets. Also, they have a powder and a premixed drink. Compared to other sports drinks, Hydrolite delivers up to 4 times the electrolytes with 75% less sugar. Hydrolite solutions are appropriate for all ages, and each bottle or package includes easy-to-follow directions. All right, you can find Hydrolite at Rite Aid or online at Amazon or click through at drdrew.com. And for more information, visit Hydrolite.com. That is Hydrolite, Hydralyte, Hydrolite.com. And we are back. And one of the things people get confused about is what makes an addict an addict. It's 60% of it is genetics alone. We say that addiction is accounted for on the 60% by genetics alone, but you sort of got it. It's a necessary sort of requisite. You got to have the gene. You got to have a positive response to the drugs. I hate opiates. They make me feel like crap. So it's hard to be an opiate addict.
One of the funny thing?
Yeah.
Me too. Hated. I loved heroin if I mixed it with meth or cocaine.
Okay.
I hated the feeling of any opiate based anything. I was just like, well, this. I don't want to drool on myself in the corner for 4 hours. That sucks.
But it sucks different. I feel dysphoric. I feel like, ugh.
You should try PCP.
But the point is, you have to respond positively to the drug. You have to have the genetic potential of the wanting to get out of control and progress. That's a genetic thing. And then the question people always ask, why do you use drugs in the first place? Sometimes it's just because it feels good. Sometimes you're just exposed to it and you get going with it. Sometimes you're a truck driver and you're taking amphetamines to stay awake and then you get going on it. Sometimes it's because you were playing high school football and somebody gave you opiates for too long and it gets going. But a lot of times it's something called affect dysregulation, where moods are too prolonged, too intense, too negative. It's a whole other sort of discussion, talk about how people develop the capacity to regulate their own emotions. But we don't do a good job of it in this country today. So a lot of people feel crappy all the time. And depression is a sort of a corollary to that, right?
Yeah.
So that's really kind of Chris Cornell's story here that spoke so loudly to people. In the 90s, I didn't understand that people your age that sort of the grunge scene spoke to you so vividly. Part of what spoke to you was this poetry about depression.
Well, and also you have to couple that with the fact that, yes, there was this amazing music that really detailed the general malaise, especially for boys in that age.
What was that?
Well, it was this. It was in the 80s and in any kind of decade or generation prior to that. It was really cool to be a jock. To wear your varsity, Letterman's jacket to school, and to be the captain of the football team. All that went away.
All the masculine
in the
stuff.
90s. Anything of posture. It was really cool, I'm sure, to have like the nicest car in the parking lot in high school in the 80s. If you had a nice car in the 90s, you were a tool. But also, all the counterculture stuff made you a tool to like the popular, to chicks. Like it was almost impossible to do something that you thought was identifiable as a trope, for a boy, and also be appealing. So there was this
so males particularly,
and we had no. It wasn't like there was a Vietnam for us. There was no draft. There was no Great Depression. It seemed like the economy was overflowing. When we did go to war, it was laughable. I mean, George Bush just went and smashed Iraq, and it seemed like weeks. So we thought life is utterly meaningless at this point. There is no great struggle. There's nothing to really.
What do you think the source of that was? I get the feeling, but I don't.
I think it was the convergence of a lot of things. I think it legitimately was an incredible market. That was the first tech boom, the 90s, as the internet really developed and became popular. And then also,
was it the too much opulence? Because the 80s, the sort of reaction to the 80s, though, wasn't it? The 80s
without
were
question,
super uncool.
And if you look at music alone, I mean, Nirvana was the gateway into grunge, without question. I remember what I was doing, how I was sitting on my parents' couch watching KDOC Total Request Video when the first time I saw "Smells Like Teen Spirit," and right there it was like, I don't like Skid Row, I like Nirvana. I don't like Whitesnake, I like Nirvana. It was a whole shift right there. But that. It was a rally cry, much like with the invention of punk to begin with. It was, guys got into punk bands. You listen to Black Flag because you hated Foghat. It was that the kind of the grandiosity of things.
I understand that's a reaction to what came before, but what was it speaking to? I still don't quite get. Because I remember Gen X. There was a lot of talk about them being entitled, and they were part of that tech boom and just expected to get high paying jobs.
Let me tell you why.
And that all burst on them too.
Because I'm not Gen X. And I'm not a millennial. I'm society's forgotten culture. And there's millions of other people just like me. So
do you think they're the ones?
I'm not a baby boomer. I'm not Gen X. I'm not a millennial. I was just this kind of bleh people that came about. That I was born in 1979, and I feel like people born 2 years before me, 2 years after me, around that era, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
And Nate, how old are you? 35. So does this speak to you? What Mike's saying? Spot on. So there you go. And were you rocked by Chris's passing?
I wasn't a big Sam
You were not a Soundgarden fan, but I think he's on to why. Yeah, he's an icon of your guys' generation.
Yeah, I mean,
it did feel interestingly because as somebody who watched, I've been in radio so damn many years, I've seen all these different sort of musical movements. It felt like that one was very short. Even though the grunge kind of went on for a while, it felt like the meat of it ended when people started dying.
Oh, there was plenty of derivative kind of rip-off bands that just downtuned their guitars and went, I hate my dad. Well, but as far as the reality of it, the meat of it
became like sort of Blink-182.
Well, pop punk came about, and the idea of making music that was happy, but was still had. Well, it was grunge elements. Was cool again, and believe me, that was a welcome change.
It was not as punk as the punk.
No.
Like Goldfinger was,
You had to, but Goldfinger themselves. I mean, John, you asked John about it. You wore it like a badge.
It was a happy punk.
I'm not writing about depression. I'm not writing about a morose despondency. Yeah. I'm writing about chicks.
Yeah,
and
so let's dig into this a little bit. So
but that didn't speak to me. It was look, I was 9 years old, and everyone I saw on MTV lived a life that looked like it might as well have been flying to Mars on spaceships. It was fantasy. It was escapism. Yeah. And then 1992 happens. 1993, Bad Motorfinger comes out. 91, I'm 12 years old. I progressed to, I see people, I was like, that guy is just like me. Rivers Cuomo, Chris Cornell obviously was beautiful, but besides that, he wasn't wearing leather pants and getting out of a limousine.
Right.
I'm like, those dudes they're trying to, at least, maybe I don't get it. Maybe I'm not there yet. They're trying very hard for a sense of realism. And at that moment
but it was
in time,
depressive.
Exactly.
Why the depression? Why was depression such a big piece of that? Because, I mean, it was Seattle. Seattle, I was thinking about cloudy and depressed. Yeah. The clothing was drab. Everything was blah, like you said. What was happening to you guys? Were you just feeling abandoned or left out?
Yeah, without question to
me.
Left
out of the party. Like the party is happening, you guys aren't invited.
And everyone celebrated the idea of youthful mischief or enthusiasm, and that my generation was the last generation of not getting a trophy, every kid getting a trophy, but it wasn't the 1950s where they tell the fat kid on the team that he was a fat pile of S.
Right.
I was kind of like we were society's forgotten children.
But it also feels like you couldn't be male. All the things that before had been associated with being male or male gratification, at least, not open to you.
I'll never forget. I was probably 16, and I was reading a book, Henry Rollins, just like a diary entry book. It was like kind of just a scribbles of him when he was on tour. Yeah. And he described a situation that happened to him in 1983 that was exactly like what had happened to me in 1994. A bunch of like kids like me, just like skate punks, but I also played sports. I just kind of was trying to fit in, dude. Yeah. They were picking on a kid that was younger by 1 grade, and I'm by no means like Mr. Tough Guy, but it seemed kind of senseless, and I beat the crap out of a kid, and then instead of what a philanthropic, courageous thing to do, it's like macho jock punk, and it's like, so wait a second. I'm a puss if I don't do if I just sit back and stay quiet in the back of the room. I'm an emo puss if I sit back and write poetry. But I'm a macho jock dick if I try to do anything even remotely aggressive or masculine.
You were chastised, even for a good purpose, for an important purpose.
And I remember Rollins telling the story about like being at a show and like a small guy getting picked on and jumping off the stage and beating up the bigger guy, and instead of, it's like, you suck, hey, we're going to spit on you. And then when you did that, it's like, oh, you're a macho jock, get out of here.
Yeah.
It's like there's this notion of, I feel like crap, so I need you to feel like crap, and we're not going to celebrate the fact that we all feel like crap. Let's just live our invisible lives and listen to this music that kind of speaks to us.
And so Chris spoke loudly to that feeling.
Yeah, but the difference is that a lot of grunge bands, much like the first wave of punk, they didn't necessarily have musical talent. They just were writing great songs and something relatable. Soundgarden was amazing.
Yeah.
Kim would rip and noodle, and then you heard this guy who was, by the way, I mean, it makes a difference. Chris Cornell was a beautiful man.
And a super nice guy,
and
too.
He would pull off his shirt and then peel the paint off the walls with this like 5-octave voice.
Yeah.
And you're just like, well, what the heck am I? This is amazing.
He was speaking to you about the malaise and the depression and inspiring,
right,
at the same time.
And it was.
What do you think happened?
It was also like Soundgarden, in comparison to say like the Lilith Fair music that was coming out right before it.
Sheesh.
Soundgarden was unashamedly powerful.
Yeah,
like they just came at you with really aggressive riffs and down tuning, but it didn't sound disingenuous. And that, dude, being 12 years old when I first heard Outshined, and I said, well, there it is. Now I don't need to be confused about what it is to be masculine in today's world. Even though I might get laughed at if I wore a Letterman's jacket, at least there's something out there that's aggressive and powerful.
What do you think Chris was feeling?
Probably, if I could only guess,
towards the end here,
because I didn't know the guy. I met him once. He was super nice guy.
Super nice guy. Yeah.
But I'm guessing that you get those things where this wasn't my goal. Man, I'll take it if I'm supposedly your voice mouthpiece. I'm saying something that's relatable. I'm just a singer that I feel like this is my where I belonged in the world. I don't think that anyone of that generation had this desire to be, oh man, I'm going to speak to the generation of the Left Behinds.
I'm trying to figure out what was going on that led to the Ativan in the first place. Just depression?
Well, he could be a chemically seriously depressed guy. Right. I mean, I still take SSRIs every day.
Explain what that means. People would have trouble imagining you're depressed just the way they would with Chris Cornell.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody sees down times. I know that's part of the human experience.
Right.
But for me, I got this initial burst of, hey, I'm pulling my life together. I'm a young man, and I'm getting off drugs and alcohol, and I got my life ahead of me. And it lasted for about 6 months. Then I realized, I'm still the same guy. And I genuinely, even from as far back as I can remember, every single doctor, any mental health professional, is the first thing you see them. Well, how long have you been depressed? I go, well, I just remember life like this. This isn't. I can't imagine waking up in a world. I can motivate myself. I can create it. I can manifest it. Reasons to want to go on. But I can't be on. To be honest with you, I'd never woken up a day in my life and thought, I'm just happy to be alive. It just doesn't happen that way. It doesn't.
Does your daughter shift that a little bit?
I am happy to be with her and see her growing up. I can't necessarily say that it makes me happy.
Okay. And happy defined as feeling good.
Yeah.
Feeling good.
Like legitimately, even when I'm doing something I enjoy, which, by the way, I don't even know what that is. It's kind of few and far between. That's
part of depression. That's a big piece of depression.
Right.
It's lack of enjoyment things.
When people ask me if I do some new TV show and they're going to do a bio of the host, they go, well, what are some of your hobbies? Like, I like to work out. And they're like, oh, you're a big fitness person? I'm like, no, I don't really like it. I just do it because I don't want to be a fat slob. And there's just nothing that I can truly say, well, like, oh, man, I look forward to this. You know why? Because I don't have what I really look forward to, and that's getting high.
It sounds like you romance the sadness a little bit.
And
I'm wondering if the music, if the guys like Chris Cornell amplified that.
Yeah.
Not in a bad way. I'm just wondering if it just sort of happened.
Well, it gave me the best friend I ever had when I was isolating.
Yeah.
Especially when I was young. I would say from 14 to 20, I was so desperate to be alone. I just didn't feel like I was ever comfortable when I was in public. And so when you're alone in your room and you have a record that is slow and morose and kind of sad and has some words that are really well written and eloquent about being despondent, it just gives you this boost of support almost. You feel like for now I likened it to being a little kid and having imaginary friends. You're 15 and you recognize like I'm alone here, but I got this record.
Yeah.
At least it gives me something to kind of
No, that's good because that's what you need.
Yeah.
Is to fill the empty. Is there emptiness too with that? I don't want to go.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the part that carries over is that feeling of lack of joy.
Yeah.
It's
very, emptiness is different than lack of joy.
But I was going to say it's still very vacant though. If you feel very vacuous when you wake up and you're just kind of, to be honest, I go to work and I do these things and I work out, whatever it may be, any kind of positive things that I do it to go through the motions. I'm doing it because I feel like people tell me I'm supposed to, not because I have this general inside desire to do it. And that leaves you very, very vacant. Listen, like sleeping around.
Yeah.
I told you about that. Like girls have this assumption, like, oh, you guys get labeled as studs if you bang a bunch of chicks, but girls get labeled as sluts. I go, yeah, but you still feel just as bad at the end. Don't let any guy convince you otherwise. It's awesome. If I was single, I probably would be still banging around. Every single time I did it, I wake up in the morning and I'd be like, oh, man.
Yeah, I feel bad.
That does not feel good.
Worry about what you did to somebody else.
Right,
and stuff. Yeah.
right.
I remember before therapy for me, I was thinking about this today or yesterday. Today I was thinking about it, that I had a lot of emptiness. That was one of the feelings I had. And I had longing for the end of longing. It was a weird feeling. You know that longing feeling?
Yeah.
Yeah. I had longing for the end of longing.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, it's weird. Let me just read an email here real quick. It's a recovering opiate addict for almost 2 years. I still have nightmares regularly about using, and I still find that it's always on my mind. Every day, I feel like my brain is broken. I don't know how to quit wanting the drugs. How do I stop this?
I always say, like, your brain may be broken, but it's broken in a like an antique vase, not broken like a new Chinese made toy. It's right. Broken in a beautiful way,
right?
And there are always going to be those cracks in the vase, but once you put it back together, you'd be like, man, this is from the Ming Dynasty.
Yeah, it's got all the
look at the character on it,
or
like raw denim. You know, these guys that pay millions, thousands of dollars for denim from the 30s because it's got all the patina of life.
Yeah,
that's your brain. I still have using dreams. Those suck, man. Those really suck.
They suck, but they're important. Yeah. There's nothing more difficult to manage than somebody who has it all together, because that person thinks their disease is gone. Somebody who has using dreams, let them motivate you to get to the next meeting, call your sponsor, do whatever you got to do. When your disease reminds you it's there, it sucks. It's a reminder, but it's a great reminder. It's a good reminder that you need to keep taking your insulin, just like if you were a diabetic. You need to keep going to meetings, keep contacting sober people, or giving back, whatever it is for you to stay sober. You got to work on it every damn day. I have a guy, just a quick thing. I just got here an email. It says, it's a guy, he's in there as Charlie Lindbergh. I have a feeling that's a nom de plume. I've never contacted any public person, but I want to say your podcast with Adam and the one you do alone keep me sober. I'm an airline pilot with 9 years plus sober. I listen to the podcast. When I'm on a layover, I'll run a lot and listen to you. It helped immediately. I can be in certain places. When you say something, it makes me stop, and it hits home for me. I'm hoping this one today really helps, because Mike's being very open and forthcoming about the thing you feel. I know you feel it, man. It's 9 years sober.
Whoever you are, contact me, too, because I want to know about the poontang ability of an airline pilot. I bet it's just off the charts.
I've triggered your
fish in the barrel.
I've triggered your banging around gene also.
Oh, yeah.
So somebody said, I love you guys together. It makes me feel better. I really appreciate it. I'm chronically depressed. I have been in therapy and continue in therapy and understand I'm depressed. It doesn't go away.
Right. So let's talk about that, because I actually think that's a good thing to talk about, which is having realistic expectations about what mental health treatment can do.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you have to. There's a certain amount of misery that's normal, and there's a certain amount of misery that sort of, I don't want to call it misery so much as, but imperfect treatment. Discomfort. Yeah. And it's okay. It's okay to have some discomfort and some unpleasant feeling states. You really have to start to look at, this is kind of what you're doing by working out and stuff. What is it you want to do? What is it you want to do? This is an unpleasant feeling I get to live with.
Yeah.
Now what? Now what do I do to lead a good life?
Yeah, and I will say this, that I don't know if I'll ever achieve this notion of being fully happy, but I do think that identifying discomfort, identifying something that may be uncomfortable and maybe a struggle, and running towards it instead of running away, does give me a sense, at least a better sense of self-meaning.
Right.
That emptiness.
Having a meaningful life sometimes is more important than anything else.
Right. Yeah,
and we've lost that. We've lost track of that.
Well, and I don't. Everybody likes to bemoan millennials. I go, dude, it's not their fault.
Of course
Every
not.
one of their idols, all they talk about is their car and their clothes and their Instagram account. Everyone that they grew up looking up to. What do you expect a 16-year-old kid to be worried about? Do you think he's like someone in 1929 who wants to put food on his Depression era family's plate? No, he has little Bow Wow lying about being on a private jet. It's not even their fault. They have and a computer in their hand.
Yeah.
That is insane.
Yeah.
That's another thing, dude. Look, it's really hard to find meaning in your life when life is so awesome. Life in 2017, much like when I was a little kid, I mean, it's not like that was that long ago. Life in the 90s was pretty cush.
Yeah,
and
I think I was saying that
it's easier to get depressed that way.
Well, I was wondering that might be part of the problem.
I was at a pool this morning, and I watched a guy swimming alongside my brother-in-law. For those who don't know, he's a disabled athlete.
Oh, promote this whole thing.
Joyrider doc, if you can.
Joyrider doc, you check it out.
It's a documentary.
His brother-in-law's story is unbelievable, and Greg Grunberg and his team is doing a documentary about it. It's unbelievable. So,
yeah,
Joyrider.
He's Joyrider doc on Kickstarter and all that, or Joyrider documentary on
Joy Rider doc. DOC.
He's a disabled athlete, and he's missing his legs from the waist down.
He was a normal guy in Czechoslovakia, in Czech Republic, how many years ago? 10 years ago?
Yeah.
10 years ago, and doesn't know what happened, but woke up with his legs cut off.
Got hit by a train.
Got hit by a train, by a car, one of those street cars, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Ugh.
And so he was swimming alongside another man who was, he had, I wish I knew what it was, but almost like those, like palsy hands.
Yeah.
Like they were normal size, but they couldn't function.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
Like cerebral palsy or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And he was swimming, and I was thinking to myself that I could become Michael Phelps, and I don't get the same gratification that they get out of just swimming their laps. And I think that's because that's an analogy for our lives. It's become so awesome to be an American in the modern day. It's pretty hard to find meaning when your life's so cush, you know?
Well, no one is advocating for meaning. That's part of the problem.
Yeah.
And so everyone's adrift searching. And I'm telling you, the piece that everyone misses is that other people are where you find it. And that's what I was sort of referring to your daughter and stuff, is we just don't emphasize that, strangely.
Yeah.
And that's where it all is. It's all I don't understand why people don't get that.
Well, I do think that I don't know so much about the way children look at it this day. And when I say children, I'm even like teenagers, early 20s. But for a man, I do find a glaring lack of celebration of love in modern America. There's no one really is going to get behind you on Instagram. No one's gonna go to work and be like, dude, how you doing, buddy? Let me just tell you, traffic was great. Life's good, isn't it? It just doesn't happen that often.
Yeah.
There's a lot of misery creates this kind of camaraderie in modern day, and then you go online and you bitch and moan about everything. People are like, you're right.
Yeah, all the
it does
negativity.
suck,
Yeah.
and there's just not a real celebration for love. And when you do try, you get kind of picked on, like
Yeah.
I was hoping that people could uncouple the idea that strength and love, they live symbiotically. They're not mutually exclusive, you know.
I absolutely, and I'm not. Many emotions are sort of an expression of strength.
Yeah.
But people feel emotions as something that should be like avoided. I don't know.
Well, another thing I would like to point out,
People
and
don't
I
know
would,
what you're talking about when you say love, though. Go ahead, point the other thing.
I wanted you to talk about this because there is also a growing amount of people that I see, especially much similar to the days after Robin Williams' death.
Yeah.
They go, well, how could Chris Cornell?
Right.
He had a beautiful family. He's Chris Cornell.
Yeah.
Everyone, he would play to sold out stadiums, and he had money. And why would he be depressed? And same, Robin Williams. Everyone loves Robin Williams. He's rich, and you go, well,
Yeah. It's his experience.
yeah.
And the externals don't mean that much. And Rob Williams, I did a podcast with Bobcat Goldthwait where we talked. Bobcat was one of his best friends.
Very close guy, yeah.
And he told me the final days was horrible. He had something called Lewy body dementia, which is an intolerable, miserable condition. And he just sort of he just impulsively took himself out of that. And there was not the usual, it wasn't depression so much as this horrible state he was in. And it was not just the dementia. They have hallucinations and agitation and paranoia and all kinds of crazy stuff with Lewy body dementias. So I'm sort of feeling all over the place here because I'm still not getting it quite yet. Why Chris Cornell? I'm getting the pieces of it, but I don't know. There have been a lot of other figures that have died of addiction or depression, like you're saying, Robin Williams, in recent years. I feel like this one was to hit a threshold of some kind. Like this one, that's why we're doing the podcast today, because it really, really affected people. And I get that it affected people your age. I'm getting a beat on why. But I think it's more than that. Is there?
Well, and also it was so unexpected.
Here's another email. My grandmother, 7 years of age, just had knee surgery. The doctor prescribed hydrocodone. She's stubborn. I worried that they might also prescribe a benzodiazepine, which is typical because people on opiates have sleep problems. Not only that, but she's acting crazy on the hydrocodone, talking nonsense, seeing things. Call her doctor immediately about that reaction. That is not okay. Plus, there could be something else going on that can precipitate that. But that's how casually we look at these medications as a medical community.
Grandkid.
Yeah, but then no one tells the doctors about no one's following up on this.
I don't think the general public, I'm speaking for myself, I don't think the general public realizes that that's a real option, like to call someone else's doctor for them. Like, who's the prescribing doctor? Get them on the phone.
That person is responsible for your well-being and care. If not speaking specifically to that physician, talk to one of their staff. I mean, you got to report this. You got to feed it back, or they don't know. They don't know what's going on.
Right, but I think that's one of those things. You being a doctor and practicing for so long, I don't know if the general public gets that.
I guess.
You can reach out to the prescribing doctor.
And it's free. It is free. It's not like calling to an attorney.
But it does
it
feels intimidating.
Do not.
I would be intimidated to do so.
Geez.
I would.
That's to me. The reason I'm so despondent about that is it's the demise of primary care. It's because you don't have I was doing my continuing medical education recently, and I thought, oh man, they have dumbed this down a little bit. This is what they expect of an internist. Is this like, oh boy, this is not what I used to maintain. So
I have another Facebook person, Sharona. My sister's into meth. She's a narcissist and keeps lying and blaming stuff on me a lot.
Hang on. That's her meth. That's not her narcissism. She may or may not be a narcissist. It's impossible to tell when somebody's strung out on
Like the neighbors called cops to check on her house, and she told me, like, I called the cops. I did not.
Which is part of meth. Meth makes you paranoid towards your family, friends, and neighbors. Okay.
I did not. She does this a lot to me, especially. Right. She always wants my help and attention.
Family and friends.
But I do everything to avoid her and try my best to not be involved. And then she said, I have manic depression, big bipolar, and PTSD.
The woman who's asking about her sister?
Yeah. So she's
wait. The user does, or the person?
No, she does. She says she has that as well.
Okay, so she can understand that this, when you got bipolar, so when you get depressed or you get manic, that's outside of your control for the most part. And same thing with your sister. She is in an altered state with that meth that makes people paranoid and preoccupied with people around them. Neighbors, coworkers, family, and it is disruptive to relationship because it is paranoid and they can get violent and irritable and attack.
Yeah,
I've certainly seen that.
Don't take this lightly, and also again, Drew pointed out, I think very accurately, don't pin any of her kind of character flaws now on her because all drugs are bad. All narcotics have bad people around them, and all have adverse effects. There's something special about methamphetamine when it comes to violence and paranoia and how it can transform. Opiates will transform someone and make them less of a human. You see them losing themselves. They almost whittle away.
Yes.
Meth turns people into bad people.
Monsters.
Bad people. I mean, I did things that I could never imagine doing.
Is some of that still bothering you?
Yeah. I don't have any.
You need to deal with that.
I don't have any. Oh, I mean, is it still bothering me in the sense that I look back on it as a human being? I go, man,
you feel guilty or whatever.
Yeah, but I made my amends. But the bridges you burn, the bridges I burned in alcohol, the bridges I burned with meth, I go, I can't even imagine the world where I would do something like that.
Yeah,
I can't believe it's the real me.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't.
And speaking of paranoia, remember I told you the story about when I took apart the TV because
tell him.
I was tweaking and I was up for a couple of days smoking crystal meth, and I took apart my friend's television. It was 90s, so it was like a big, huge box, and I completely disassembled it because I was positive Conan O'Brien was talking to me from within.
From inside.
Yeah,
Conan was in there.
I was like, I'm gonna get you son of a bitch! Sweating.
I'm gonna get to you. Did you have? Was there an observing part of you that went like, "That's nutty"? What am I doing?
Not till weeks later. Weeks later.
All right, here's another email. Needs serious help. I'm 44. I'm addicted to Suboxone. I'm supported by my parents at age 44. I'm disabled with fibromyalgia, osteoarthritis, chronic migraines, anxiety, chronic fatigue. I'd love to have a life. All that is potentially symptoms of being on the high dose of Suboxone. Yeah. And fibromyalgia, that does not get better with opiates for sure. The one thing I would say about fibromyalgia is people don't say enough of, focus on restoring good sleep. Because have you ever gone days and days without sleeping? You get that kind of achy, horrible feeling. That's fibromyalgia. And if you can normalize sleep and sleep hygiene, not just sleep time, but sleep hygiene, the quality of the sleep, the fibromyalgia can settle down a lot. My son's being treated with risperidol after a psychotic episode, was also given Ativan, which is okay. He wants to take it again as an outpatient after consulting with a psychiatrist, or he will see the psychiatrist in 2 weeks. He has done meth in the past, and we believe he is bipolar. That's a tough one.
Yeah,
that's sort of nuance. He may or may not be an addict. He may have just done meth.
Right.
Who knows what?
How hard is it? How hard is it to diagnose bipolar with a stimulant addict? Because when you're
really
on,
hard.
when you're
I can't
on
tell you how many times I've seen stimulant addicts diagnosed as
it's exactly
bipolar
as
1.
Being manic.
It is bipolar. When
you're smoking
like
crystal meth, you're just a manic person.
It looks like bipolar 1, except there's always this weird paranoid preoccupation with people and stuff that manics may or may not get.
Stupid Conan O'Brien.
Well, yeah, these psychosis is you get these ideas of reference and things. You get delusional. You think people are beaming thoughts into your head, Martians. You think you wear, the guy in Breaking Bad, the guy's wearing the foil on his head, and electricity and all this stuff. That's kind of a psychotic symptom. And you may see things, you may hear things, you may hear voices, but the delusions are sort of a hallmark. You believe that you're something different than you are, and so.
Steve-O has some great ones.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Like what?
Like a guy coming into his house, his apartment, taking a bong load, sitting down next to him, talking to him, and then just walking into the wall and disappearing. Yeah, dude. Like that didn't happen. He's like, no, it didn't. It's totally a hallucination.
Delusion.
Yeah.
All right. So any other questions out there? Okay.
They can't hear me, so it's kind of like
they only hear us.
I mean, they're all listening.
Okay,
you're good.
Okay, but if anything they'd like to hear about, or things that we'd like to, we're talking about Facebook Live here for those of you listening to the podcast.
Miss seeing you on TV.
Thank you.
You're talking to me.
Yeah.
I want Drew and Mike to have their own podcast, even if it's once a week.
Okay, we're contemplating. Well, go to
you
KBC.
have to say what I just said. I don't know if they can hear me.
We both really want that.
Yeah,
we're working towards it.
Okay, but the producer is saying that people are saying they want us to have our own podcast, which we do. If you go to kbc.com, check out that one. But we'll have a separate one, hopefully one.
Okay. All right. We'll do
a love line sort of one where we don't have phones in this setup. We only have what we're doing here. And so we want to get a phone set up before we do that one. So
if I could say anything, especially in the wake of Chris Cornell, it is that we Americans more so than anyone, love to glorify and romanticize one aspect of addiction and alcoholism. And we always neglect to look at the reality of it. Yeah. And the reality of it is Chris Cornell is in a grave, not writing songs about despondency and having throngs of teenage girls cheering for you. And it's not Hemingway getting in fistfights in front of a bar. It's Hemingway waking up alone with a missing tooth and Dylan Thomas dead, not waxing poetic in the middle of Times Square. We've done it with all forms of artists and athletes, and we romanticize the very narrow margin of addiction that seems cool, and we always overlook the reality. And the reality is that you have a bunch of dead people or people who are on their way.
It's a serious medical illness that is potentially fatal, commonly fatal. And there's overlap of other conditions with addiction, like things like depression and whatnot, and it makes it very, very dangerous, very dangerous. And it's really important that if you have addiction, that whoever's taking care of you really, really, really understands that disease, or you have somebody in your camp that can at least talk to the physicians, the prescribing people, who really, really, really understand, and you listen to. Like I remember AM used to have a woman that he would listen to. Unfortunately, the story goes that somebody said to DJ AM, when are you going to stop listening to those people that are trying to brainwash you? As soon as that message was delivered by somebody with a prescription pad, he was dead in 2 weeks. Yeah. That's how that works.
The guy who I used to really, God rest his soul, I used to really look up to DJ AM. In the recovery community. I was like, that guy's doing it right. He was really humble about it, because he was, at the time, when he got out of Crazy Town and became just DJ AM, he had become sober for quite some time and was a superstar and never gave off that.
He right, and he always. I sent him tough cases. He would go to the mat for people, and he always would tell me, he goes, "Look, I am a really serious drug guy. I'm like you didn't see me in my disease, but it's bad when it gets going." And
yeah.
Bob is devastated
by Chris Cornell's passing.
Absolutely. That's why he's not here today.
Yeah, Bob, this Chris Cornell thing, again, it rocked not just people your age. It rocked the Bob Forrest of the world. It rocked, I know, a lot of you out there. And that's why we set up a podcast today, was a chance to talk about it. I hope we kind of got into the landscape properly and helped make sense of it for people.
If I could give an analogy.
Real quickly, a lot of people sort of started wanting help in response to Chris Cornell, and that's a good thing.
Good.
That's why I started reading a lot of the emails. We got a ton of emails here of people wanting change, sort of waking them up to the need to pay attention.
As soon as you want to go,
and don't be stigmatized. For
as soon as you want to step in the ring with your fears and the difficulty, that's a good sign. You know that you're reaching out. But I was going to say, if I can make an analogy, you ever hear the stories as to why Chris Cornell I think is so devastating? You ever hear those stories, those horrible stories on the news where like a Marine serves 4 tours and then comes home to only, to get hit by a guy with DUI, and then he dies. And you feel like, well, that's the guy who gave the ultimate. He did it. He did it right, only to have it all taken away. When someone has a long amount of recovery and does it right, and then they fall to the disease, it's like that much more. You're like, oh, man, that's the guy who went through it. He already went through the trenches.
And I think what's really bothering Bob is that he is hearing over and over of people being affected by my profession and the prescribing and taking people out. It's really bothering him, and that's why he's been going off about Suboxone and other things that I understand. I understand. You have to be very, very careful. If you're an addict, don't take a benzo. It's very simple. Don't take a psychostimulant. Don't take a benzo. Don't take an opiate. Don't drink alcohol. That's it.
Yeah.
Go to meetings. It's simple at its core. You got to keep it simple. And, of course, if you have other conditions, they need to be treated, but don't let one of those 4 classes of medications enter into your system. Yeah. It will activate your disease. Yeah, we have, of course, the National Assessment, National Addiction Foundation at 888-494-9186, 888-494-9186. They'll help you if you want to try to find a place for treatment. Even if you don't have resources, they will stay on top of you until you find a place.
One last question.
Okay, one more question.
One last question. Yep. Do you have any good ways to treat RA without opioids?
Rheumatoid arthritis?
Yes.
Of course. Rheumatoid arthritis. Okay, is there any good ways to treat rheumatoid arthritis without opioids? Now, somebody with rheumatoid arthritis, there are lots of things for rheumatoid arthritis. There's all these biologic agents. There's tons of stuff. Steroids sometimes are necessary. Steroid-sparing agents. There's a lot of different options for treating rheumatoid arthritis. But even then, sometimes the disease destroys the joints and causes a lot of pain. If you're an opiate addict, you shouldn't be taking opiates. If you're an addict, you can't take opiates for it. You have to try other modalities. And there's lots of ways, local injections or pain blocks or lidocaine patches or anti-inflammatory or whatever it might be. There's lots of options out there. Again, I would have you take an opiate. I have patients with rheumatoid arthritis that are not addicts that take 3 Vicodin a day, 4 Vicodin a day. No problem. Right. And it helps them. But an addict, you can't do that. It will only make things worse. If you go over, I always tell people, if you go over 3 Vicodin a day, we're going to start to get into trouble with this. It's going to start to make things worse. So an occasional use is not a big deal. And again, there's lots of different kinds of options out there, other things for rheumatoid arthritis, but to make sure you're thoroughly and completely treated out there. Don't cut any corners.
RA is serious pain, right? That's legit.
It can be. But it can be. It's so treatable now. I mean, it's something that can really. We have so many good treatments for it that people do still get left with pain for it, and just don't get into high doses of opiates if you can avoid it. And if you're an addict, don't take any opiates because you will escalate. All right. So I guess what I'm sort of left with, is I wanted to say some things about depression and suicide. Depression is a common thing. Half of Americans experience some form of depression or anxiety at some point in their life. Suicidality is just a sign of the severity of the depression you're in. And again, addicts get it even independent of the suicidality. If you have bipolar disorder, you're more likely to commit suicide when you're manic than when you're depressed. That's a piece of data people don't recognize. But none of these things should be stigmatized. People should ask about it. If you have friends that are suffering mood disturbances, ask them, are you thinking about hurting yourself? Do you have a plan? If somebody's thinking about hurting themselves and they have a plan, that's a medical emergency. That's as bad as if they're saying they're having chest pain and shortness of breath. That's a life you can save if you get them to an emergency room, call a mental health service line, whatever it might be. just don't let this be different than any other organ system. It's a brain. It has symptoms, just like my knees, like rheumatoid arthritis, just like my pancreas, just like my heart. Brain manifests its conditions, its disruptions. Because we're all biological, it's never all perfect all the time. The brain manifests through conditions like this. And they are manageable, they are treatable, and they are dangerous. Treat them accordingly. Okay, is that about right?
That's about right.
Yeah. All right, we're going to wrap up. Ms. Producer, anything before we do wrap it up?
Thank everybody on Facebook for joining us.
Thank you on Facebook Live for joining us today.
Yes,
we appreciate it. Thank you for those of you that sent emails. You can do that at doctor.com/contact.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad. Thank you for coming in, Mike, when Bob couldn't make it. And Bob, I'll be interested to hear when Bob sort of gets a perspective on this, what he'll be thinking about it, because he's upset, and reasonably so. So it's more than just your generation. It rocked a lot of people. And I, for him, I think it is. It may also be just sort of the numbers of people that we've been dealing with that died of prescription deaths recently. And Chris is not specifically what we've been seeing forever, which is the opioid benzo combination. Somebody that knows better using that. This is somebody who's kind of following a program for a while, and yet it's still destabilized his disease. He kind of knew better, right? I mean, he's a long-term recovering guy. And we're just tired of seeing people taken up, and people don't understand this condition. When did knowing better stop a drug addict from doing I understand that. Yeah, that's exactly right. But I can really understand how he could have rationalized all that easily. And this is getting through to people that Ativan can cause acute depressive symptomatology, and somebody who's already been suicidal, suddenly suicidal, especially in an addict, and his had escalated where he's using more, and he was slurring his speech and this kind of stuff, which is inevitable in addiction. If you're taking these medication, you have a history of addiction, you're in danger. That's it. Period. And people, Bob and I always have to argue about Suboxone, whether that's good or bad. That's kind of a special case of all this. But please be around people that really understand your condition. My deepest concern about all this prescribing of Suboxone is being done by people that don't really understand addiction. And they're doctors allowed to like up to 250 patients on Suboxone. I couldn't do 20. And I know what I'm doing. And it's kind of, if you're going to take 50 or 100, it kind of means to me you may not fully understand what you're into unless you have a team around you, where you have a full team that is there for those patients.
And the stakes are death. That's the crazy part.
Yeah.
We're not talking about like, you might lose some hair.
No,
bad skin.
This is a dangerous disease. And if you don't die, it takes your life away from you. And your relationships and everything else. So, all right, Mike, thanks so much. Anything you want to plug other than the joyriderdoc.com?
Just your sweet butt.
All right. We'll don't laugh at him. All right. We'll see you next time.